Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our weekly updates. We are waiting for Jessica, our president, to join our conversation today. She's having a little technical issue, but she will be joined shortly. Meanwhile, I would like to introduce you to Deborah Gudzov. She's been with us since many webinars. She's been fantastic, helping us with the help desk, helping us with our webinars every week with new topics. And then we will have also a new guest. It's Ruth Colp-Haber. I hope I pronounce it well. Founder and partner at Wharton Property Advisor, Inc. So today, they will focus their conversation, their discussion on commercial lease renegotiations. So I believe it's a very interesting topic today, and both of them, they have some presentation to share with you. So just a simple reminder, we are here to help. Manhattan Chamber of Commerce has been very active on with our help desk. Please email us if you have any concern. Email us at events@manhattancc.org. Again, events@manhattancc.org. And then also, I highly suggest you to always follow us on social media and on our website, and see all the updates for new events, new webinars, new e-meetings. Our website is www.manhattancc.org. Again, www.manhattancc.org. So let's see how Jessica can join us. Yeah, he's having still technical issues. So I would suggest to Deborah start with your presentation, and then meanwhile, hopefully she will be on stage. Deborah, would you like to start your presentation?
Yes, I can get started. There is something up on the screen, so I will put my presentation.
Would you try to? Okay. Yes. Here we go.
Okay, great. So welcome back, everyone who's joined us previous weeks. Welcome to the new guests, and we're happy to be able to share some information with you this week. This week, we are going to focus on something that many people had inquiries on in previous weeks: how to deal with your landlord and negotiations. Many of us have office spaces, but presently, regrettably, we are not able to occupy those spaces for various reasons. In some instances, we can't occupy them because we're not considered essential workers. However, our office buildings remain open. So the big question is, what do we do? We're in some respects precluded from using those spaces, but yet we do have to pay for them during a very trying time where many businesses have no income at all or have severely diminished income. That said, there's two sides to every story, and the other side of the story is, while everyone believes that the landlord is well funded, sometimes that's not the case, and the landlord relies on the rent for the upkeep of the building, as well as for the services. And there's a whole host of people, especially in a large commercial building, that need to be paid in order to keep the building going. So we have conflicting parts of the equation that we all have to be mindful of. So with respect to this, we wanted to be able to give you some tips on what you can do if you find yourself in that position where you just really can't move forward and you don't have the funds. One thing I will alert you to each week, we have discussed the PPP program. Always keep in mind, if you did get those PPP funds, 25% or should go toward rent. So a lot of people have inquired as to what to do with the funds if you don't have your full staff. Obviously, right now, 75% has to go toward paying the employees and 25% to other expenses, which can include rent. Keep that in mind. As to that issue, sort of a side issue for what we're discussing today, but there have been a lot of inquiries and complaints to the SBA and to the government about the CARES program and the manner in which that's been structured. And there is discussion about changing those ratios. And of course, the Manhattan Chamber will keep you on top of that as that develops. So we have a statistic that the real estate commercial market in the U.S. is $62 billion worth of rent. So that's a very large number. And as we have been subject to shelter in place, unable to use our offices, are working remotely, or may even have a space, let's say, in a WeWorks type setting where even if it were open, you question whether you can bring your staff back to that type of environment where everyone's sitting in a dense space. So that's something certainly to keep in mind as to your employees and what you can and cannot do. Sort of a side issue and maybe a separate issue for a separate webinar on employee issues when we're transitioning back into the workplace. So one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of people are just saying they should automatically be allowed to stop paying rent. It's just not fair. And if everyone's lease is different, we're not here to give legal advice on your lease, but there is no guarantee that there's anything in your lease which supports that decision. So if you truly believe there's something in your lease and you've found a clause that you think will be helpful, certainly consult your attorney or go back to your commercial broker. You're going to be hearing from Ruth in a bit. And a commercial broker can also help you and assist you in determining whether that clause might be an out for you with respect to rental obligations. So as in our current situation, there's a moratorium on evictions in the commercial as well as the residential space. That doesn't mean that you have to just stop paying rent. It just means your landlord's hands are tied if you do not pay rent. So keep in mind that one doesn't mean just because your landlord can't evict you, doesn't mean your landlord cannot pay. So that is something that some people have had some misapprehensions about. So another area where we have talked extensively, lawyers have written extensively on the issue, is the force majeure clause. That is a clause in most every lease, and again, everyone needs to check their leases, that says that if there's an act of God, there would be an instance when your are suspended due to that. Question, is a pandemic an act of God that would qualify under the force majeure clause? Regrettably, this is not a developed area of the law with respect to pandemics. We have some experience with this from Hurricane Sandy, for example, and 9/11, and those natural disasters and acts of terrorism did fall within those force majeure clauses in some instances. Again, every differently, and we can't generalize here. So if you have one of those clauses, that may become a basis to cease your obligations. But right now, there is no reported case law in New York that is dispositive of the issue. So this is going to be something that we see unfolding in the future, because right now, the courts in New York State are not taking new temporarily. So we have not seen the litigation that's going to arise out of this issue. Keep it in the back of your mind. It may be an argument, but it is not something one should rely on. So let's talk about negotiation, because a lot of what's going to happen between your company and you as a small business owner negotiating with your landlord, a lot of this is really about negotiation as opposed to what your lease does not say. And negotiation is something that you go into only when you have a clear intention. So before you start any conversation about your lease, have a clear intention based on information. Go over your lease. Go over your financial projections with your accountant or your financial advisor and see where you stand. Is this something that's going to be viable for you in a couple of months, or is it never going to be viable for you because it's just too onerous? So it is very important to take stock of your situation before you move to the next phase and open the door to that conversation with your landlord. So certainly make sure that when you negotiate and you get that opportunity, that you're getting exactly what suits your needs, and always have that goal in mind throughout your negotiations. So the question is, do you have any leverage? Many leases read, I always like to use this as an example, a lot of leases say if the building burns down, it's up to the landlord whether the landlord can require you to continue to come to the office and continue to pay your rent. It's sort of an overstatement, but that's how a lot of us feel when we read our leases, because they can be very one-sided and your obligations do not cease, and it's very difficult to overcome those obligations. But that said, remember that this is an issue where landlords need tenants, and they need to retain tenants, because if they can't keep the tenants happy and the tenants default, they are going to default. Many landlords are very leveraged. Some of the largest ones are very leveraged. They have mortgages that they have to pay. So you do have a modicum of leeway to try and to go in there and get something that suits your needs. So keep in mind, you do have some leverage. That said, when you go into the negotiation, a lot of people have come to me, client base, some people have picked my brain about this, and they're very angry about the situation, because we're all angry about it. We all awful that we have to reduce our staffs, that we can't use our offices, that this is all happening to us, and people go into this with this feeling of anger toward their landlord. And many times the old adage, you get more bees with honey, applies. It is best to go in. It may get heated, it may get adversarial at some point, but it's best to go in with the demeanor of, look, we both are in a difficult situation. Where can we come out where this will make sense for both of us to either continue? It may be that the landlord says, I just want you out. I want my space vacant for something else. So certainly, go into this understanding you do have a level of leverage in the negotiation. Keep in mind, we will have a lot, and I know Ruth is going to speak to this, there is going to be a lot of empty space. We have a lot of those WeWork spaces. There, companies are going to go that have work situations. So there are going to be opportunities. Keep those opportunities in mind and keep the best interests of your business in mind. So at some point, most of us will return to work. And I think from a basic standpoint, while people are adaptable and can work remotely, the bottom line is in most businesses, being able to have face-to-face contact with your employees is preferable. So there will come a time when you decide to re-enter your space when it's appropriate. So how do you handle this? What is your ask? So I have landlords actually reaching out to commercial tenants and saying, look, I understand this is a difficult time, and I'm going to give you free rent, or I'm not going to collect this rent, but I'm going to spread it out over the course of the remainder of your lease so that later, and you'll basically a months when you, that's certainly an option. And if that maybe you've seen that work, the case, and you're not just getting a freebie and you're going to have to pay it back later. Do your financial projections. Make sure that that addition will.
So I'm seeing that Deborah as well, she's having a little technical issue. I'm sure she will be back in a few seconds. Let me see. Yeah.
My apologies for that. I was saying something.
Deborah, we lost you for at least 1 minute. Can you repeat what you were saying?
Yes. So what I was saying is, if you are going to be negotiating to pay off a portion of the rent that's forgiven, let's say for the next 3 months, and you're going to spread it out over the course of time, make sure you talk with your, or you feel comfortable that you're going to be able to meet those obligations. So that's certainly a way that people are negotiating. Another negotiation tactic is people are going to do what we call blend and extend. We agree to extend and maybe get some free rent, because usually when we enter into our lease obligations, part of Hello? I'm sorry.
Lost you again for a few seconds.
Okay. All right. My apologies. And I apologize to everyone. I'm not quite sure what's going on. But in any event, blend and extend. You come up with an extension to your lease term. You may have a reduced rent, and you will get some free rent, which is what usually happens when you enter into a new lease obligation. Now, let's say you're looking for some negotiation tactics with your landlord. One thing that I've seen come up repeatedly is a lot of buildings have in place for return. They are not following the CDC guidelines. An argument could be made that this is not a safe, meeting OSHA requirements for me to bring my staff back. So I am not going to be obligated to pay the rent during this period of time when I cannot bring my staff back. So if this is the case, and you are trying to negotiate on the basis of safety and hygiene, it's important that you have a full understanding of what your building's plan is for return to work, what chemicals they're using for cleaning, how they're cleaning, what requirements they're using to enter into the elevator. These are all going to be key components of what you need to consider going forward. Again, I think a lot of different approaches, and I'll recap them. You approach by saying, you know, I can't back here, it doesn't meet OSHA requirements. I want to would be my security deposit or use all of my security deposit and I will replenish it over time.
Again, I apologize for the technical issue today. Deborah will be back shortly. Apparently she has some, yes, here we go. She's back. No. One second.
Hi, Nadia. Should we go to, oh, no, she's back.
Hi, Jessica.
Great.
Yeah.
Deborah, my sincere apologies, everyone.
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Okay, my sincere apologies. I hope you can hear me, and I don't know what's happening. It keeps happening, and my sincere apologies. Anyway, the other option is to use your security deposit and then come back and replenish it over the course of time. And then there would be this blend and extend where you extend your lease and then you would then get some free rent and maybe get a better deal. So again, keep in mind you may be able to stay with a much better deal than you presently have. And when you do this, put it in writing. Both parties have to sign the agreement if there are any modifications. Otherwise, under the law, it will not be controlling and you will be reverting back to your original lease. And so, you know, I think again, this is going a time for us to get together and think of creative ways to go forward, keeping in mind that there may be things, for example, in the retail arena, sometimes leases do, landlord gets a percentage of your, for example, there you can continue with the idea that a percentage would be toward repayment of rent. Again, at the end of the day,
Deborah, we can't hear you again. Deborah? Okay. Jessica, are you here? Would you like to take over and maybe Deborah can finish later?
Yes, I was going to say maybe we should go to Ruth, who can fill in some of the gaps there.
Sure. Ruth, do you feel comfortable going now? Let me unmute your microphone. Are you ready to go now?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So Deborah,
there's Deborah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry again. I was just about completed. I guess the segue into Ruth's provision, and again, my sincere apologies, is that you should consult with an attorney, check to see what your personal obligations are in your lease, if you have a personal guarantee or a good guy clause, and then finally, speak to people like Ruth, because they have their hand on the pulse of the market, and they will be able to help you move forward and navigate what is really uncharted territory for all of us. So thank you for your patience. My PowerPoint will be circulated, and because I have not been able to give a seamless presentation, if people have follow-up questions, I am happy to answer them through the help desk.
Thank you so much, Deborah. So Ruth,
Yeah.
I will share your presentation, but please feel free to start.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank Deborah and Jessica and Nadia. Deborah, I thought that was a fantastic summary of the many issues involved with lease renegotiation. And, this topic of these I get many calls every day. Lease obligations are approximately 80% of a small business's overhead. So these are very important numbers. And as you said, everyone is really mad now because not only do they have to pay their rent when business is in total turmoil, but almost all of them can't even access their space and use their space. But just to give you an overview on the market, the tenants aren't happy, but the landlords are certainly not happy either. To give you a sense, everyone, what's going on right now, basically the market is at a complete standstill. So remember, the New York City office market, this is the biggest office market in the world. Typically, every day, approximately 100 new spaces come on the market. These days, maybe 1 or 2 come on the market. Every landlords and potential sub-landlords are all holding their space back until the market officially opens and we can have space showings. There's a lot of question how we're going to have space showings. One idea I've heard bandied about is there may need to be space showings on Saturdays, of all horrors, to we commercial real estate brokers. The issue becomes when you have a space tour and you bring a group of, say, 6 people, and already the elevators are so crowded, that's just going to add to the problem of the traffic in the building. So there's going to be a lot of issues even before the market opens, whether the market will open. So to give you an overview of lease renegotiation, it's very hard to generalize because each landlord, each lease, and each tenant are completely different. So just start with the landlord side, which, of course, I'm speaking to an audience of predominantly tenants. However, it's good to know what you're up against, I think. The landlords are in a state of shock. They are seeing a market dominance and hegemony of, I'd estimate, about 80 years coming to an end. Landlords controlled so much of what went on in New York buildings, in the New York economy, and now there are real questions whether tenants are going to want space at all. Retail, of course, there have been questions about the retail for a long time. So the landlords are facing a crisis, and each of them are reacting differently. There are some good landlords, and though they view their tenants as business partners. Every landlord hates empty space. Empty retail space is a massive problem. The building looks bad. Empty office space means you're not getting any rent. And these vacancies, they could be sitting there for years. So the good landlords want to work with their tenants. They want to help their tenants succeed in their businesses so that the rent can be paid. However, at the other end of the spectrum, there are those landlords that simply feel you pay the rent or you're in default. And this is going to be, in my opinion, the difficult landlords are going to have a harder time than ever attracting tenants. And some landlords are going to be losing their buildings because they, in turn, when they don't collect their rent, won't be able to pay their mortgages and pay their other operating expenses and real estate taxes. The leases, each lease is different. So if you have 12 to 18 months left on your lease, you are in an excellent position for a successful lease renegotiation. Because your lease is coming due and there is going to be an effective mark to market very soon. Now, on the other hand, if you have a long-term lease, that becomes more difficult. However, there are things that can be done for you to take advantage of what's going on in the market if you need to. And then lastly, each tenant is different. You all have different businesses, and you need to, in the midst of this chaos, try to make short, medium, and long-term plans in an environment where everything is uncertainty. But each business is different. Some businesses simply are out of business now. Others, after the turmoil, after we get back to an open market, should be able to recover. But one thing for everyone is it's a very, very hard time to plan. So a few practical suggestions and guidelines for a lease renegotiation. When you go to approach your landlord, you want to go in there with a real presentation, and Deborah discussed this. You want to go in there with a real presentation of your financial condition. It probably won't surprise many of you to hear that there are some tenants, some, for lack of a better expression, rich hedge fund managers that are gaming the system, that are asking their landlords for rent abatements, that aren't paying their rent. And that's creating ill will on the part of their landlords, because there are so many tenants that really cannot pay their rent and no longer have a business. So if you are going to go in expecting and needing a big rent reduction, you want to have all your ducks in order. So financial projections, financial statements, bank references, and you want to explain to your landlord that this is a serious situation and you really need their help. You also want to be aware that you're negotiating in a declining market and the nature of the real estate cycle. The real estate cycle in commercial real estate is very different from the cycles in other markets because it moves very slowly. So remarkably, we may not see significantly lower rents for another year. And that's because the cycles in real estate work around the lease. And most leases till now were 5 to 10 year leases. And until that lease is due, the landlord is not required to make any changes to the rental rate. So while I am projecting just personally that rents will be going down 25 to 30%, the landlords may not be offering those reduced discount rate, those reduced rental rates for another year. Now, besides the retail rental rates going down and the rent rates going down, also will be improving for tenants is the free rent package and the work letter allowances and all the other aspects of the lease. I mean, we're basically, in my opinion, going to be going into a very tenant-friendly market. And the landlords are going to have fewer and fewer options for filling their space, which means they are going to give more attractive terms to those tenants that they deem to be credit worthy and good fits for their building. So I have on the second page of this outline several practical suggestions of specific concessions and ideas for lease renegotiations with your landlord. So obviously, to ask for free rent. First of all, I would try to arrange a meeting with your landlord or a Zoom call or something to get in front of them and have them get to know you and understand your business. Of course, there's free rent, and to ask for forgiveness of May rent, June rent. Landlords don't like that, though. They want the status quo as much. They want to hold that as much as they can. The other thing I'm seeing is also what Deborah mentioned about ask your landlord to go into the security deposit to take out some of the rent that is owed. I mean, this is what the security deposit is there for. It's there for an emergency. I will tell you, if the landlord is going to go into the security deposit, you definitely need a lawyer involved, because this could affect your status with your bank and could trigger potentially some type of default of the lease. But this, I'm seeing this happen. And as Deborah said, if you have a 6-month security deposit, tell the landlord, look, take May and June rent from my security and I'll replenish it in August. A rent deferral. And to get I would look at your financials and say, okay, look, we can pay May, June, July, but it's going to be August, September, October that we're concerned about. Can we pay those 3 months at the end of the term? I'm also seeing some landlords extend the term by the months that the tenants don't pay, and then the tenant pays at the end of the lease. Also, such as a blend and extend. And then, I feel if you're a retail tenant, there are other things you can do. And some of the landlords are getting creative here, and I think it's wonderful to see. For example, Brookfield Properties, which it's one of the big worldwide global REITs that owns a lot of malls worldwide, including here in New York, Brookfield Place. Now, think about it. When you enter Brookfield Place, which is numerous restaurants, shops, fantastic retail that the tenants of Brookfield Place walk through. If you're walking through shuttered stores, you're not going to want to be in that complex as an office tenant, let alone as a retail tenant. So these retailers are really in a quite unique position, because their very presence in the building helps the landlord lease not only his other retail space, but his office space. So Brookfield has set up a fund whereby they are investing in these retail enterprises. And really, in a way, what they've determined is they're in the retail business. They own the business. And I think this is a very hopeful move, because let's face it, the retailers need help, and the retailers, it's an amenity for these buildings. Also, this is also from the standpoint of residential buildings and not just malls. When you say there's a gym in the building, that helps to rent the office space. It used to, when, the Starbucks, good retailers that tenants enjoy using are an amenity, and that's negotiating leverage that a retailer has. And then, the last thing I'm seeing start to come back is a mechanism that was around for a little while, maybe 25 years ago, which is a revenue sharing type of lease, whereby a tenant will say, look, you landlord, I don't want to fix the rent, but I'll pay you 20% of my gross revenue. So I would urge you to be creative, to really analyze your business and try to get a handle on what your landlord can do to help you survive this next year, and when you need the money and what you're going to use the money for. And those would be my suggestions.
Okay. So thank you so much, Ruth. That was very helpful. Please, Jessica, can you take over?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well out there. I originally planned to go first to just sort of give you some high level things that happened since we met last week. But terrific information about the topic at hand here from Ruth and Deborah. So I know that we're going to have a lot of questions around this. So I promise we will get to your questions in just a minute. I just wanted to give you a quick update about something that the governor announced yesterday. And that was the strategy for how we're going to go about reopening the state. And so this is what you're looking at is the cover page from the report that he put out yesterday. Some of you might have already heard about this, but I just wanted to focus on a few things. This slide shows basically the governor has announced that we're going to start opening the state up by regions. And he divided the state into 10 different regions. New York City is its own region. And each region then has to meet certain criteria in order to start reopening. And he created this dashboard of 7 criteria that will be used to determine when a region can open. Currently, New York City is only meeting 4 of the 7 criteria required to start opening. You might have heard that some of the other regions are going to start opening as soon as Friday. Each region, when they do meet that criteria of 7 out of 7, and I'll show you what that is here if you want to, in this slide. These are the 7 criteria, mostly, of course, around health and making sure that there are enough hospital beds, in case we see some sort of a relapse. And each region, when they are deemed to meet those 7 criteria, will reopen in phases. And there will be at least 2 weeks in between each phase. And of course, the idea here is that the way that they're going to phase this in, it has to do with they're going to be looking at prioritizing businesses considered to have a greater economic impact and inherently low risks of infection for the workers and customers, followed by other businesses considered to have less economic impact and those that present a higher risk of infection spread. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of how this is going to go. It's a little grainy here, but this is what the governor plans to do and how they plan to phase in the different businesses. And you'll see in phase 1, when New York City is deemed ready to start reopening, phase 1 is going to start with construction, manufacturing, agriculture, and then of course retail, which is huge for a lot of our members. In phase 1, it'll start with curbside pickup and delivery, which is similar to what's happening with the restaurant industry now. And after that, you see the other phases. Retail can fully open, professional services, finance. You see all of that. Phase 3, that's when restaurants and food services can begin to fully operate again. And finally, phase 4 will be arts and education. And the other thing that of note is that even when we do reach these different phases, each business needs to have a specific plan about how they are going to go about opening, because businesses are different and they really need to be thoughtful about what they can do to make sure that there are no threats to their employees and customers. And so I just wanted to show you, this is Target, the big store Target, put out and released to everybody their framework for making sure, how they go about cleaning their stores and protecting their employees. And this is something that I will make sure in the email that goes to everybody on this call later today, we will attach this just so you can see some of the things they're thinking about, how to make sure, what you should be thinking about, like I said. So we'll share that as well. If you have any further questions, I try to be very brief here. If you have further questions about this, reach out to our help desk, which the information I know is in the chat, but again, the email address is helpdesk@manhattancc.org. And quickly, one other thing I wanted to raise, it's something that we're concerned about. Our chamber does a lot of advocacy work. And right now we're concerned, honestly. To me, it's unbelievable because small businesses are really hurting, and I think everybody seems to be aware of that. But unfortunately, the city council is considering legislation that is counterproductive and potentially harmful for some small businesses. So we have two bills of concern that are currently being considered by the city council. One is what's called a just cause bill, and that basically limits the conditions, the allowable conditions under which you can discharge an employee. And as currently drafted, the bill would only allow a business to discharge an employee based on misconduct or unsatisfactory performance. So you wouldn't even be able to do layoffs that are needed because of the economy. It's really nuts. Also in the bill, you would have to go to arbitration or even be sued to be able to try to show the justification of why you need to make these staffing changes. So we're very concerned about that. It's something that we're trying to, I see Ruth's concern. You see that it's a big problem. The other bill is what they call hazard pay. And, there's a big movement to want to give additional funding to essential workers right now, which, we totally are supportive of everybody out there who's doing the deliveries and really trying to keep things going while everybody else has to be at home. And there's a movement at the federal level to try to fund, additional pay for these essential workers. But the city council is trying to preempt that, and they have proposed that for businesses with more than 100 employees, and that includes full-time, part-time, temporary, would have to pay a premium to their essential hourly workers. And that's above the pay that they receive currently. So, and that's between $30 between $30 and $75 per shift per worker. So it could really add up for those businesses. So we're concerned about that. Anyway, if you have questions about that, like I said, these are proposals that we are currently trying to improve and or educate the city council about why those are counterproductive. But if you have concerns, questions, please again reach out to our help desk. Okay, so that is the update. But I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about the real estate stuff. So let's get back to that, and I will open it up here for Ruth and Deborah. Let's see some questions here. Okay, somebody wants more information about the good guy clause to cancel leases. Let's see.
So one of the options that I raised was, in the event you have a lease and you have personally guaranteed the lease in some way, you have an extra layer of concern. It's not just your company that's on the line, it's potentially yourself and your personal assets that are on the line. So some leases have a personal guarantee. Some leases have what's called a good guy guarantee. And again, we're generalizing here. We're not giving legal advice, but those guarantees basically say if your company leaves the premises and you have gotten all of your belongings out of the premises and you leave the premises as you found them, then you personally will not have a personal liability to the landlord. These clauses vary, so it's very hard for us to give you any advice whatsoever, but do take a look at your lease and see what, if any, personal obligations you have. I spoke to someone recently through the help desk who told me they had a change in their lease, and it turned out there was an error and they signed personally, not through their corporate entity. So be mindful of that portion of things, because many of us have a corporate entity to have a shield against personal liabilities.
I just have a question, Deborah, around that, because a big part of the good guy clause, which, by the way, I think are in 80% of the leases in New York City, if I had to estimate. So it's a very common clause. But there's been a lot of issues I've heard with tenants. It's not so easy to move out.
Exactly.
So if a tenant stops paying their rent and they want to move out immediately so that the good guy clause is not triggered, plus the courts are closed, what happens?
Right. And that is a concern that I have addressed with many people in the last few months. And that is, yes, I want to stop my liability, but I am precluded from doing so. So again, in that instance, if your intent is to get out of your space, obviously, if you can have a negotiation with the landlord, do speak to an attorney about what your options are, because it may be that you say, I am invoking that clause, and you may lose your right to go back and remove your furniture, your belongings, your computers, etc. So there is no definitive answer on that yet. Again, because the courts are closed and there hasn't been any litigation over it. But there may be a way, if you give notice that you're invoking it, to at least stop the potential for any liability.
That's great. Here's another question. What if you are a subtenant? What rights do you have then?
Yeah.
So as a subtenant, you are subject to your sublease agreement. So you are really, you're looking to the person who's the sublessor. Now, while technically you are responsible to abide by the terms of the overlease, your agreement is between you and your sublandlord. So you would have to look at the terms of that relationship and follow those terms. It may be another small business owner that you're subletting from. So your conversation is with your sublandlord in all likelihood, because your sublandlord is on the hook to the over landlord, which is, the landlord we have been talking about throughout our discussions. But a lot of these principles might still apply, because the sub landlord has a responsibility to keep paying the rent. So there may be some ways, if the sub landlord has negotiated with the landlord, that negotiation may actually inure to your benefit.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Jessica, because it brings up another very important point about the sublets. That what's happening for some subtenants is the entity who they sublease from, the sublandlord, is going bust or not. So what the subtenants ought to do before they pay their sublandlord is they should contact the landlord of the building, make sure the sublandlord is in fact paying their rent. And if the sublandlord is not, the subtenant should be able to make an arrangement and direct it to the landlord.
That's a very good point.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's happening with WeWork, by the way. WeWork has a lot of enterprise spaces that I'm told these are actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jessica. These are actually tenants WeWork, but conceptually they're subtenants. And some are looking to bypass WeWork, who of course there are many rumors about WeWork and their imminent demise. And they're looking to go directly to the landlord to pay their rent, because if you pay your rent to a troubled company, well, good luck with getting any of that money back.
There was a lot of talk about a rent strike. And so, I think people were thinking that if nobody paid their rent, then, there would have to be some sort of action taken. And it sounds like it didn't take off. But is that something you would advise, or what I'd love to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'd say it's going to be very hard. I think that will be easier to pull off on the residential side than the commercial side. The commercial tenants are very disparate, and I don't see them getting together for anything on any matter.
Yeah, I think, to Ruth's point, that, may work in the residential arena. But one thing to keep in mind is that you may want to talk to other tenants in your building. And if there is a tenant in your building that has a lot of space and has some clout, there may be some strength in numbers. So it is something to consider if you can join forces with others. If there is a building-wide issue, such as your building does not meet the CDC requirements or OSHA requirements to reopen.
Yeah, this is all brand new territory, by the way. It hasn't been done, but I think it's an excellent idea.
Right. You just don't want to be the only one, right? No. Well, thank you. Is there any closing thoughts? Anything that you think that we didn't cover, or just from the questions you think you want to underscore?
It's going to be very tumultuous this next year, and I expect it'll be a solid year before the market settled down to doing transactions on any kind of regular basis.
Yeah, I think I would echo that, and also just advise everyone, as I do every week, look at your lease, look at your financial statements, and really plan this out, because getting a rent concession may not get you very far, and you don't want to use goodwill up on something that you're not going to be able to follow up on. So, and as always, get ahead of these things. As Ruth mentioned, reach out and get ahead of it.
That's fantastic. Listen, thank you so much, Ruth and Deborah. I'm sure that this was helpful to a lot of people. And if folks have additional questions, please reach out to our help desk. The information is in the chat there. Everybody on this call is going to receive an email later today. We'll have the slides that you presented, along with the information from Target that I mentioned, and also a few other links that might be helpful. But thank you so much.
Thank
you. Next week, I think we're going to cover, we're going to start looking at different technologies that are available to help businesses right now. And of course, as always, we will try to answer any other questions you have and also provide any updates. Things are just moving so quickly. So we'll see what happens between now and next week. But thank you so much. And I hope everybody stays well out there. Talk soon.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.